guys, Sarah here. So we have a little bit of a different video today. Someone in my YouTube comments suggested and asked that I would make a video on how I set up the lay boxes for females to lay eggs in. So that's what I'm going to be doing today, and I'm actually in a different room to do that today, sitting on the floor, because I wanted to have everything here with me. So I'm going to start with this box enclosure. This is a perfect size enclosure for a female's lay box because it's short enough that it'll fit inside of other containers. So if you're using the underbed storage containers to house your females or anything taller than that, these will fit in there just fine. And this is actually the same size that I use for my yearlings, which is what this container was originally going to be. That's why I put holes in it. But it doesn't stack very well with my other yearling containers because my other yearling containers have like more rounded corners and stuff like that. So I decided to use this as a female lay box instead of using it as an enclosure for a yearling. I'm just going to show you here about the size. I'll show you the tag so you can see about the same, anything that's around the same size. This actually might be a little bit big for like newer females who are a little bit smaller, but it's general rule of thumb, like that's about how big it is, and it'll be good for most females. The other things that I have here are, this is vermiculite, and I also have a bag of perlite. I like to use vermiculite and perlite as a mix for both my females laying eggs and to incubate the eggs in. That's a personal preference. A lot of people like to use moss. Moss is perfectly acceptable. You can get sphagnum moss. I don't recommend just going out in your yard and getting these things. I also don't necessarily recommend going to the garden section. You can find these things in the garden section, but a lot of the time they're going to have chemicals in them for gardening. So you just want to make sure that anything that you get doesn't have additional chemicals in it. And I also have a container of water because we're going to need that as well to mix. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the lid of this enclosure and I'm going to cut a hole in it that's maybe 1 inch to 2 inches in diameter, big enough for a female obviously to get into it. I prefer to make my holes on one side instead of in the middle, because that way one whole area is completely blocked off and she kind of feels like she's able to hide a little bit better. If there's only one entrance way on this side and she has this whole other side to hide, seems to be a little bit better for the females. They just tend to respond to it better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a pocket knife to make the first cut and just sort of cut around a hole here. And you may not be able to see everything that I'm doing, but you just want to be very, very careful when you do this. This is not the best knife to do this with, but I'm trying here. Okay, I have a little bit of a hole. And I'm going to pause the video, I think, and finish up this hole and just then show you guys like what size of hole I'm going to end up with. Okay, so this is the size that I ended up with, and that's just like a basic cut. This is not what I'm going to end with. It's a little bit small, you can kind of tell. So what I'm actually going to do is, one thing I forgot to mention that I have is a soldering iron. So I'm going to take a soldering iron, and you might actually be able to hear the fan in the background. Anytime you're using a soldering iron, especially on plastic, you want to make sure that there's good ventilation in the room because you don't want to be like breathing in all the plastics. In fact, it's probably not super good for me to just be here doing this without some sort of face covering, but I'm not going to go get a face covering just for this. So one thing I like to do then is sort of melt around the edges. This will help with a couple of different things. For one, you can make your hole a little bit bigger, and for another, you can also like smooth out any rough edges that might cut the snake or anything like that. So I'm just going to kind of do this, and then if I have to make some bigger cuts, I definitely will. But you can kind of see here what I'm doing. I'm just evening out the rough edges and also making the hole just a little bit bigger. So I'm going to pause the video while I do that and then show you what the sort of finished product of the hole is. Okay, so this is my finished product. I did use the knife a little bit more to kind of cut out this corner. If you'll remember, this was a little bit bigger. So I went ahead and used the knife to cut off here a little bit more, and then I just went ahead and went around with the soldering iron until it was kind of smooth and round and there's no rough edges anymore. So So that's pretty much all you'll have to do for the top. If you do have a container that is taller than this, and if, like, say you're using the underbed containers and to house your snakes, but you don't have anything that's this short to put in there, you could actually put a hole in the side instead if you wanted to do that in one side. If you could make it a little bit higher up off the ground, that's going to be better, but it's kind of up to you. Just make sure that your snake can actually get in there comfortably and easily. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and mix in some vermiculite and some perlite. So first I'm going to start with vermiculite. It doesn't really matter which one you start with because you're going to end up mixing them together anyway. Pretty much all you want to do is make sure that it's pretty much equal parts of both. So I'm just going to go ahead and dump all of this in there. I don't know if you could kind of tell how much that is, but this was just sort of a like to-go container. You can buy them online in bulk. I sometimes use those as baby enclosures. So you can put that in there, and then I may end just using all of this perlite. It's not going to be exactly equal parts, but this is not quite as full as I like it with vermiculite. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my perlite in there and see where we are. So I used about half the bag of perlite, maybe a little more, maybe like 2/3 of the bag. And I'm going to kind of mix it up with my hands. It's a little dry right now. But yeah, so, and that's a good depth for the most part. You can kind of see it evened out there. And you can see that's just what it looks like when it's all mixed up. You don't want to use too much of just vermiculite for either of those, for either like incubating your eggs or just having your females in there, because vermiculite by itself has traces of asbestos in it, and when that's the only thing that's in there, especially if there's no water, you can have issues with asbestos and your snakes can get respiratory infections. Some people actually like to avoid vermiculite altogether, but I have found that as long as it's moist and as long as it's sort of mixed with other things, it's not quite as bad. So, and it's not going to affect your eggs at all. It's mostly just going to affect if your females are breathing it in a lot. So there's the mix, and pretty much I'm just going to go ahead and put water in it. I don't know if I'll need all of this water. A lot of times people will say 1 to 1, but sometimes I feel like 1 to 1 is kind of a lot. So I put in about half of the water that I had, and I'm just going to go ahead and mix it up. I have a little like knife here thing that I'm going to mix it up with, and see where we are. What you want is for everything to be damp, kind of moist, but not so wet that water is going to like run off of it. You want it to be wet enough that any dust and anything is still going to be kind of suppressed, but not so wet that it's going to maybe rot, or that it's going to, you know, just be, you just don't want it to be overly moist. Eggs, especially snake eggs, can drown, so you don't want them to like be completely soaked. Keep in mind when you put water in this, it might expand a little bit, and I'll show you that now. You can see it's a lot more fluffy than it was, and I personally don't think that it's quite moist enough, so I'm going to put in a little bit more water. You will have to get your hands dirty for this. It's not like dirt, but you will have to use your hands some to kind of gauge how wet everything is. And I mean, you could just mix it up with your hands. I prefer to use like a spoon or something like that. That's just a personal preference. Mixing it up here. And a general rule of thumb for making sure that this is wet enough but not too wet is if you can pick it up and squeeze it and like really no water drips out. So you can see a little bit of water dripping out there, but it's not 100% mixed either. There's still some in here that's completely dry. So I'm going to mix it all up. And if it does get too wet, you can add a little bit more bedding, or you can leave it sit out with the top open for a few hours or even overnight, and it will dry some of it out. The top is really what does it. So I'm just going to lift this up, squeezing, and there's no water coming out. It is still moist, but there's no water dripping. So I think that this is actually a good hide box or moist box. You can use these as hide box as well. A lot of people will use this as a moist box for snakes that are getting ready to shed. I again don't prefer to put vermiculite in anything that's going to be permanent or semi-permanent or used for a long time for snakes, just because of the breathing it in too much. If you just have it in with a female for a couple of days, or maybe like a week, so if she has like her pre-lay shed, you put this in there. It's only in there for maybe a week and before she lays eggs. That doesn't seem to be too bad. But if you're going to be using it as like a hide box or a moist box long term, I would not be putting the vermiculite in there. So there is your box for females, and I'm going to put this in one of my pregnant females enclosures right now, and they'll rearrange the bedding how they like it. They'll get a nice comfy spot, and they will hopefully lay their eggs in there. One thing I do want to mention is some females will like use their water bowl as a place to lay their eggs, and that will surely drown the eggs. So if you are, if you have a female that's getting ready to lay eggs, it might be worth taking the water bowl out and only offering her the water like physically for like once or twice a day. So if you get up in the morning, offer her some water, kind of put her face in or near the water bowl so she can drink, and then maybe at night before you go to bed do the same thing, because there are a lot of females who for some reason really like to lay eggs in their water bowls. I say a lot, it's not a lot, it's actually a very small percentage, but it does happen. So I hope that video helped you guys. I'm actually going to be putting together baby snake enclosures next, so if you want me to make a video about that, just let me know in the comments, and if there's anything else in particular you'd like to see, let me know. I do plan to get back to doing the morph videos soon. I know you guys really like those, but I'm really trying to get a good software so that I can show you guys morphs like up on the screen, like most other people can do, because I feel like that's going to be a lot better for everybody if you can just see photos of the morphs that I'm talking about as I'm talking about them. So look forward to that, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.